It's no longer a secret that we as human beings love to revisit old, bad, or unfavorable habits either consciously or unconsciously. Even though we deliberately made ourselves countless of promises to refuse or never to concede when temptations strike, occasionally we just can't help ourselves but to voluntarily or involuntarily loosen up and let our basic instincts take over our rational and objective decision-making process, or rather overwhelms them to let our minds relax for a bit and not be so uptight and strict on ourselves. Because for most of us, it does eventually get quite monumentally tiring and taxing to always be mentally on guard and uncompromising. Now, realistically speaking, for most of us, unless we're extremely obsessed, immersed, and focused on attaining a life goal, it is not an utterly preposterous or unacceptable circumstances at all for us to occasionally or momentarily decompress, unwind, and relax for a short period of time, just to enjoy a selection of some of the justifiable temptations around us in order to refresh and restart our minds so that they can become more cognitively effective and efficient when we do get back on track. Eating a bit of junk foods, watching a little bit of Netflix, drinking a little bit at a social event, sleeping a little bit in the afternoon, playing a little bit of video games. It will be far from the end of the world. And as far as I'm concerned, most of us are actually pretty capable of not sleeping completely out of control when we do enjoy ourselves alongside our selection of reasonable bad habits. We often simply just dust ourselves off the temporary obstructions, pick up where we left off, and we're back where we want to be. There is absolutely no critically endangering problem with this particular circumstance. It's literally your cheat day, if you want to call it that way. It is only those who are unable, incapable, or desperately can't help to remind themselves that they are being too overzealous in rewarding or basking themselves, to the point that they are literally losing themselves within the whole paraphernalia of distractions, that they eventually regress too far downhill to pick up where they left off and lost nearly all of the progress they've made, or most of the progress they've made. Basically, they're in too deep and too fast to make the easy U-turn back to the surface, and now they've become negatively buoyant, which makes it much harder for them to swim back to the surface. Like I said in a previous video some time ago, you are literally getting too comfortable and unaware for your own good. Regardless, you falling repeatedly too far back into the comfortable but dangerous realm of your old habits and having to work your way back up much harder to the point where you previously left off could stem from either one and or a combination of these four factors or reasons. The first one is pattern recognition. Now, we human beings are creatures of structures and habits. We need some form of constitutional order in our lives in order to feel sane and secure, and removing or changing that order will instinctually cause us to become convoluted and yearning for an establishment of disposition or regulation that we can live by. Oftentimes, it always results in us trying to desperately save our old order way of living that we've been accustomed to and conditioned in for so long. It's just a survival and safeguard mechanism. That is why trying to steer away from old habits to build new ones is a bit like trying to get used to living in a completely different house around a completely different environment after staying in only one house for your entire life. I mean, what can you say? Old habits do die hard. Making crucial changes is hard. That is why we often always get tempted to revert back to our old ways of thinking and behaving because they feel safe and comforting, especially when we talk about our bad habits. They're much easier to form due to the absence or lack of any resistance. It takes quite a significant amount of time to become fully established in a new order or structure of life. Imagine playing video games daily for 10 years straight and wanting to completely get rid of it in the first week. Not that you couldn't, but chances are you won't be able to, unless you experience the next reason I'm about to explain, which is lack of drastic and severe consequences. This is probably the most important point out of them all. Nothing induces immense dread and the desperate need for immediate changes as experiencing a traumatic or devastating life circumstance that results from our own misconducts. When we experience a traumatic event, especially the one that is caused by our own action or inaction, we tend to reflect on them deeply and extensively to try and figure out what went wrong and distinguish whether there are any patterns to our mistakes. Such a toll of physical and or emotional damage will almost always incentivize us to conscientiously avoid making that same mistake again and or try to find a way to thoroughly fix that mistake in case it happens again in the future. Now, most traumatic events outside of our control happens abruptly like an anvil being dropped onto your head, making it more effective objectively for us to form a new structure or order to live by. However, the consequences of most traumatic events resulting from our own bad habits and mistakes are often slowly accumulated over time through minuscule and seemingly unnoticeable yet actually noticeable cracks and deformations that we often mindlessly ignore or ignorantly dismiss, because they lack the momentous magnitude, or rather being too understated to bring you into full attention for your own mistakes, until it eventually accumulates into that giant anvil that drops onto you one day. Smoking and lung cancer, for example, sugar and diabetes, porn addiction and erectile dysfunction, alcohol poisoning, extensive procrastination, lack of emotional control. Now, some of these consequences are temporary and can be fixed over time, but others can become lifetime critical, and trust me, you don't want to be on that end of the scale. It is arguably necessary to indulge in temptations once in a while, but it is absolutely necessary to remain mindful of your own limits. That is why I think it is important to plausibly and tangibly induce a sense of sensitively profound dread into yourselves regarding the narrative towards your own bad habits and old mistakes, to compel you to think twice or even more before making any decisions. Next is the natural response to emotional distress. This one is very obvious, and I'm sure most of you gentlemen have experienced this as well. When we are clouded or overwhelmed by negative emotions, our first instinct is to immediately vent out and react and/or try and find a way to numb those feelings of utter distress and torment. Again, an innate defensive response from our survival instincts. And the fastest and easiest method is to either emotionally react to release those profound emotional tension and/or seek some form of comfort or salvation through instant pleasures and gratifications. Lashing out, sobbing your eyes, chugging an entire bottle of liquor, munching off one full bucket of ice cream, snort some powder, jerk off, sleep the whole day and doing nothing for the whole week. It's not an uncommon scene to become caught in this web of spiral after a massive breakup, getting fired, losing a loved one, life-changing injuries, destruction of reputation, lack of results, and extensive loneliness. No matter how far you've veered away from your past mistakes and old bad habits through completely developing a new frame and structure for your life, all it takes is one very bad day for you to become seductively tempted to revert back to your old, destructive, and degenerative way of living. Even in the early stages after experiencing trauma could lead you to this circumstance once again. Unless you have options of methods and constructive endeavors that you could effectively utilize to distract yourself from or controllably convey or express those negative emotions building up inside of you in order to put a halt into dire proceedings, there is a high chance you will inevitably succumb to your innate temptations. And finally, unsupportive environments. Our environments contribute significantly in shaping our identity, whether complementarily or derogatorily. Mostly it comes from the external influence of friends, family, and culture. A lot of us who are still young lack a profound sense or having an underdeveloped sense of individuality, and mostly are also lacking the ability to make decisions purely for the productive sake of one's own existence. Even if we do have a strong sense of individuality, we still occasionally become societally seduced and peer pressured into conformity due to the fear of loss of community and/or reputation. And human beings innately hate feeling isolated. Now, it is utterly beneficial and wonderful for us if our environment entirely supports and escalates the better structure of life we are trying to construct for ourselves. It just takes away the unnecessary resistance and makes life easier for us. But if the opposite occurs, it gets unbearably arduous to try and endlessly resist the constant nagging, ridicule, and threats from our environments to come back to how we used to live like that fits their degenerative ideals and narratives. Here, you really have no control over their decisions or perceptions since they are still deeply rooted within the comfort of their old order way of living. The best thing you could do is either move to a brand new and mutually constructive environment, or at least try your best to re-engineer your environment to better suit your new way of life. And yes, I'd also say having the right friends and/or companions is crucial. Remember, treat your past mistakes and old bad habits as critical options for you to always consider when you feel like you are slipping away. Because most of the time, we always underestimate their effects until we eventually taste the bitter flavor of regrets. And because at the end of the day, it is your own decision, your own responsibility, and your own consequence to face. That is why, in my own experience, the best method to prevent yourself from slipping too far away and repeating the same mistakes again is to constantly condition yourself by inducing a profound sense of immense dread when thinking about or performing your past mistakes, especially the ones that have the most personal impact, so that it could obstruct the momentum of the slip. Fear compels us to question and reflect more than any other negative emotions because it puts us into a state of having something major or significant or meaningful to lose. And that is why it is arguably the best effective tool for influence. Thank you for watching.